comparative. Nowadays, we're seeing the term Indigenous being used by scholars and Indigenous people alike. It's being used globally, and it's well liked because it connects Indigenous groups to one another across the world. It connects Indigenous people to the indigenous plants and animals and environment that they find themselves in and connected to. And this indigeneity is a useful notion that we're going to go forward with. So I'm not talking about the words I'm using, right? Because you probably have heard some version of some of this before. And if you're in a class of mine, you definitely have. Words come with stories. Every word tells a story. The word Indian up there tells a story. Columbus was lost. The Native American phrase tells a story. Professors in the Northeast try really hard to be nice, but don't always get understand the degree to which indigeneity is part of who I am. And this is what brings me to Ken's house. Momaday is a super important, very influential Kyle novelist who actually died not too long ago. It's a sad loss. But he said in a speech in the early 70s, an Indian is an idea a man has of himself. I could look at that. For Momaday, the idea of being indigenous is an idea that is expressed in story. The stories we tell about ourselves. I've just told you a story about myself. And my idea of myself as an indigenous person. And this is a space we can all enter into, to look at indigeneity, not focusing on the ways in which it's a genetic or a cultural or a sociological or a legal construct, but in the ways in which it's a philosophical framework for viewing the world. And we are invited to do so by indigenous thinkers. This isn't inappropriate appropriation. This isn't borrowing something that isn't ours, that we shouldn't use. Indigenous thinkers are writing books about this and giving talks and saying to us, please, learn to think the way we do. Learn to do scholarship the way we do. And that way is through storytelling. Kimmerer, who's a botanist and a Vanguard Genius Grant winner, has written a really lovely, lovely book. And she explicitly invites settlers to find a way to become native to this place, to live here as though you were staying. She tells us, being naturalized to the place, right? You're not indigenous, but you can become naturalized. You can become part of the place. Means to live as if this is the earth that feeds you, as if these are the streams from which you drink that fill your body and fill your spirit. To become naturalized is to know that your ancestors lie in this ground. Here, you will give your gifts and meet your responsibilities. To become naturalized is to live as if your children's future matters. How do we do that? Because that sounds awesome. Right? To be a part of this place, to become a part of this place. A lot of it's already in what she's saying. She's already telling us how. And part of it absolutely demonstrates her environmentalist concerns. That's a given. That's only the top layer, though. Your ancestors lie in this ground. Your stories are this land's stories. And because those stories are yours and those stories belong to the land, you should care about the land that supports your stories. You should tell the land's story because it's telling yours. You have gifts and responsibilities. This is a very communal-oriented way of thinking about individual identity, rather than thinking of it as you're going to go off and you're going to become great. You're going to be here. And you're going to be great for all of us. We're all with you. And that we includes the plants, the animals, the stars, our friends, our neighbors, regardless of where they started. They're here now. And they're in your story. So tell your story in a way that brings everyone together. And that brings us to Joanne Archibald, who is from a tribe of the Pacific Northwest, and I have trouble with those tribal names, has dedicated a career. She's a professor emerita at University of British Columbia in Victoria, I'm pretty sure. Her career is based on the notion of storyboard. Stories are how we know the world. You might think it's analysis. You might think it's dividing everything into little piles and categorizing this pile, categorizing this pile, categorizing this pile. No, it's a story. A mathematical proof is a story. A medical file is a story. responsibility, reverence, and reciprocity. This sounds like a system of ethics, and it is, absolutely. But this ethics governs how we interact with stories. And remember, everything is a story. When Kimmerer talks about walking, she talks about listening to the plant tell her the story. Everything has a story, everything is known through a story, and that knowledge is passed on through a story. And so I have to have respect for my story. I don't kill the last bird to put it in a museum to study it and tell its story. I respect my subject. I have responsibility for my story. I make sure I understand as much as I can about my story. I don't wing it. I don't fake it. I give you as much as I can, and when there's a gap, I tell you. That story I told you at the beginning, that's the latest version. There are so many versions of that story. 5 years ago, right after Hilda wasn't even in the story. She existed. But now I do. And it's responsible to put her in there. But it's responsible to let you know. I never met her. I don't know what she was like. I don't know if she socialized with her sister. Because she was in the same school. There were so many schools of ours were going on. Reverence. The story is powerful, right? Talking about diversity is talking about identity. And this is why people get nervous when you say, we're going to talk about diversity. Because their response is, oh my gosh, you're going to attack my identity. Be polite about the stories. Be reverent. Be respectful. This story is the summation of someone's being. It may not be yours. Be kind. Reciprocity